If you're looking to take your podcast to the next level and you want to shave off some time from the production process, then this video is for you. I'm going to go over 5 pieces of useful gear for podcasting that you may not have thought of. So we're not talking about microphones, headphones, all the obvious stuff. These are things that I found really useful for producing and running my podcast, and adding these things to your podcasting shopping list could really help you during the production process and beyond. And then there's a bonus one at the end. You might already have one of these. A lot of podcasters do, but they're not using it in their podcast production process. Number 1, it's an Elgato Stream Deck, or another brand of hardware control panel that allows you to customize the buttons to do certain things on your computer. This is a massive time saver for me. For a podcaster, it's useful for doing things that you have to do a lot of on your computer that normally takes multiple steps. You can combine all these actions onto one button. And even though it might save you only a few seconds, half a minute, every time you use one of these macros, over time and throughout the production process, when you're editing multiple episodes every month or every week, it's going to save you a huge amount of time overall. Some examples of what it can be useful for speeding up your process. You can use it to launch applications. So for example, if you've got a podcast interview coming up, you can press a single button, then it will launch Zoom or Riverside. It will launch your script for the podcast, and then it could automatically change to a different setup on the Stream Deck that has all the controls for Zoom, which is another great use for these devices. So if you're in Zoom or in another application, you can set up buttons. You can also download setups that people have created already, so that rather than searching around your screen for certain buttons like mute and record and things like that, you can set up macros that just do all that with the touch of a button. The second piece of gear I'd recommend is a mouse with extra buttons. Now, this one is especially useful if you are editing your podcast yourself. So for example, I use a Logitech MX Vertical, and it has 2 extra buttons on the side and an extra button on the top. There are plenty of other brands that have extra customizable buttons on their mice. This is a Steel series, and it has 2 extra buttons there, and an extra button below the scroll wheel. And there are loads of cheap mice on Amazon that seem to have extra buttons on them, but the key here is that these are programmable. So they come with software that allow you to, similarly to the Stream Deck, that allow you to set the buttons to do whatever you want them to do. So for example, you could have zoom in and out. If you're editing on Pro Tools or Reaper or Adobe Audition or whatever, you can zoom out, or you could set them to cut or copy. So you can have almost all the controls you need on one hand without having to look for the keyboard shortcut every time. And if you haven't seen one of these and you're wondering why it's such a weird shape, this vertical mouse, it's basically to ease up the tension on your wrist, and it helps reduce wrist pain. So that's also a good one if you do a lot of editing and you find yourself with wrist pain. Obviously, go and see a doctor, but just from an anecdotal point of view, I found that the vertical mouse has helped. The third piece of gear I'd recommend is a pop filter for your microphone. Now, this might be something you already have, but I want to go into specifically what type of pop filter. So if you have a microphone with a built-in grill, like this Audio-Technica ATR 2100X, this does help. The grill helps, and then it's got a thin layer of foam, and it stops those windy P sounds, the plosives that get picked up on your recording that can be quite hard to deal with and distort your recordings. But I find that this often isn't enough. It's quite a thin layer of foam. So I would recommend getting one of these to stick on top as well. Now you have to find one that fits on your mic, but just that extra layer is going to help prevent those plosives, so you can get the mic really close and get that warm, intimate recording without having to worry about distortion from plosives. You can also get this kind, which attaches to a boom arm or a mic stand. I find that these, while they're a bit more transparent, as in they don't affect the sound so much because it's just this kind of thin mesh, I find that for podcasting, this isn't such an issue. I use one of those for recording music, vocals, but for a podcast, I just find it so much easier and less cumbersome just to get one of those foam balls on the end. And if you have something like a mic that I'm using now, like the Shure MV7, it already has one built in, so you don't have to worry about that. But it's just something to consider depending on which mic you have. And number 4 is a boom arm. Again, this might be something you already have, or you might already have a desk stand that came with your mic. I know the like the Blue Yeti is a popular mic for podcasters, and it comes with a stand. But because they sit on your desk, they pick up a lot of taps and shuffles and things, and also they're very difficult to position in exactly the right place. So what tends to happen is when people buy these Blue Yeti mics, they just sort of stick it on a desk somewhere, and it picks up what they're saying, but it's not ideally positioned, and it's giving them a really reverby, sort of echoey sound. I would recommend getting a good quality boom arm that you can attach to your desk, like this Elgato one. Rode also make a really good one, and then it will allow you to position that mic directly in front of your mouth. And if it's a good one, it's not going to make any noise when you move it. So if you do have to adjust things during recording, you can normally just sort of adjust it slightly without it squeaking or without the mic picking it up. And the fifth one is acoustic panels. Now, if you're recording in an untreated room, i.e. just a room in your house or an office, then likely it's not going to sound great acoustically. So it's going to pick up a lot of natural reverb, the sound waves bouncing off the walls, which is going to give you this unprofessional and echoey recording. Now, if you use the right mic, a dynamic mic like the ATR 2100X or a Shure MV7, then the amount of reverb that it's going to pick up is going to be minimal, but it can still help to treat your room. So you can get these cheap foam panels like I've got behind me. You can get some more professional ones like the GIK Acoustics ones that are just off screen. You can also get printed ones. Again, the one you see on my right is also GIK Acoustics, and you can get them printed as a square, so it's perfect for your cover art. I've got a client who got one of these done, so it works to deaden the room, make it sound more professional, and also it's a nice display of their cover art that will show on all their podcast videos. So this is not something that you have to have, especially at the beginning if you don't have much of a budget for your podcast, but it's definitely something to consider over time if you want to really level up your audio quality. And then I said I was going to add a bonus piece of gear in the end. The final one is just an excuse for me to give you that nudge to back up your files. Get yourself an external hard drive or a second hard drive that you can back up all your podcast files to. I know a lot of podcasters who aren't backing up their files, and they're uploading their episodes onto YouTube, onto their podcast host, but you don't own these platforms. So if for whatever reason you lose access to your YouTube account or your podcast host account, then you could find that your podcast is just gone. So I'm not saying you have to back up all the raw recordings that you make, because it could start to get really cumbersome. But at least after you've completed each episode, back up all your podcast files on an external hard drive. Failing that, you can get a subscription to something like Google Drive or Backblaze to make sure they're backed up somewhere else. But just make sure that you've got your podcast in some other location other than just on the podcast platforms. And there you have it. These are the top 5 or 6 pieces of podcasting gear that I'd recommend adding to your podcasting shopping list to save you time and make the podcast production process easier and get you a better result. And if you found this video helpful, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more podcasting tips and tutorials. And let me know in the comments section below, is there something I've missed off? Is there a piece of podcasting gear that you swear by that you feel other podcasters might overlook? And as always, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.